$8,400 vanished from my account in less than a week, and when I confronted my brother about it, he shrugged and said, "Kids will be kids." That was the moment everything in my house changed. But how did I go from opening my home to my family, to locking them out of my life? My name is Jordan Whitaker. I'm 36 years old, a single mom, and I work in risk and compliance for a health insurance company, which is a polished way of saying I spend my days thinking about what can go wrong when people ignore rules. I look for weak points. I close gaps. I prevent damage before it spreads. At least, that's what I do at work. At home, I ignored every red flag waving right in front of me. I've always been careful with money, not in a dramatic, spreadsheet every hour way, just in a quiet, survival way. When you're raising a child on one income, you don't get the luxury of being careless. Every dollar has a job: mortgage, utilities, groceries, gas, my son Ethan's soccer fees. And then there's the category I try not to think about too much: medical expenses, the co-pays, the prescriptions, the just-in-case fund that never feels big enough. That's why, on that Friday night, when I came home exhausted and heard a lazy voice drift from my living room, "Hey, I used your card for candy," I didn't immediately panic. I should have, but I didn't. I was tired, the kind of tired that sinks into your bones. I dropped my purse on the counter and kicked off my shoes, barely glancing toward the couch where Tyler, my 19-year-old nephew, was sprawled with his phone glowing against his face. Candy, I told myself. A few dollars. Not worth a fight. I had been telling myself, not worth a fight about a lot of things lately. You see, 4 months earlier, my brother Ryan had called me from a parking lot in another state. He'd lost his job. The company he thought he'd retire from had downsized, and suddenly he, his wife Megan, and Tyler were behind on rent. The landlord had given them notice. Ryan sounded broken, not angry, not defensive, just defeated. "Just for a few weeks," he'd said, "until I get back on my feet." I didn't hesitate long enough. I had a 3-bedroom house in Denver. 1 room was mine, 1 was Ethan's. The 3rd was my small home office, my quiet space, the place where I worked overtime and tried to keep our lives steady. Within days, that room was gone. I moved my desk into a corner of my bedroom. Ethan gave up his room so Ryan and Megan could have it. Tyler took over the living room like it was a temporary dorm. At first, it almost felt nice. The house was louder, fuller. Ryan joked in the kitchen like he used to when we were kids. Megan talked about all the projects she was going to start, selling things online, launching a side hustle. Tyler scrolled through his phone and hummed along to music, talking about influencers and concerts and drops like those were real plans. I told myself this was what family did. The grocery bill doubled, then tripled. The power bill crept higher because someone always had the AC blasting or the TV on in every room. Takeout containers stacked up because we're too stressed to cook. My card was the one swiped every time. I work in risk assessment. I know what unsustainable patterns look like. But at home, I kept telling myself it was temporary. Ethan stopped asking if we could take weekend drives out of town. He knew I was working extra hours. He lost his room, then his quiet, and bit by bit, I think he lost some time with me too. Still, I kept saying yes. Yes to groceries. Yes to gas money. Yes to streaming subscriptions no one turned off. Yes to the benefit of the doubt. So when Tyler said he used my card for candy, I didn't challenge it. But later that night, when the house was finally quiet, something nudged at me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way he'd said it, casual, entitled, like it wasn't even a question. Around midnight, I opened my banking app. The first thing I noticed was the number at the top. It was wrong. Then I scrolled. Concert tickets, VIP level, gaming equipment, designer clothing, a festival deposit in another state. Charges stacked on top of each other over several days, some pending, some already processed. In less than a week, $8,400 had disappeared. I didn't gasp. I didn't scream. My heart didn't race. It went quiet, like the air had been sucked out of the room. That money wasn't extra. It wasn't fun. It was the fund I'd been building for Ethan's medical bills, for the car repair I'd been postponing because it still technically ran, for emergencies, the kind that don't wait until you're ready. I stared at the transactions until the numbers blurred. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my mom. My voice shook as I laid it all out, the charges, the dates, the amount. I half expected her to be outraged for me, to say this was unacceptable, to demand accountability. Instead, she let out a small laugh. Not cruel, not shocked, just dismissive. "Oh, honey," she said, "kids will be kids." That sentence landed harder than the $8,400. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. No one was coming to protect me. Not my mom, not my brother, not anyone who wasn't directly depending on my paycheck to survive. If I didn't take this seriously, no one would. I stood up from the edge of my bed and walked down the hallway. The living room was dark except for the blue glow of Tyler's phone lighting up his face. He had earbuds in, laughing softly at something on his screen. He didn't notice me. I didn't say anything, because I understood something right then. Yelling wouldn't fix this. Arguing wouldn't fix this. Explaining wouldn't fix this. Control would. I went back to my room, sat beside Ethan asleep in the space that used to be his, and opened my laptop. If kids will be kids was the excuse, then I was about to become the consequence. And that was the night everything shifted. When I think back to how we all ended up under the same roof, I can almost pinpoint the exact moment I chose compassion over calculation. It was 4 months before the money disappeared. 4 months before the word theft ever entered my mind in connection to my own family. Ryan had called me from a parking lot in Arizona, the wind loud in the background, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. He'd been laid off from a logistics job he thought he'd retire from. The company downsized. His position was restructured. That polite corporate language that really means you're on your own. Their rent had fallen behind. The landlord had stopped accepting promises. Megan's part-time work hadn't covered the gap. Tyler had been taking a gap year that stretched longer than anyone expected. Ryan kept saying it would only be temporary, just a few weeks until he found something steady again. I remember standing in my kitchen, staring at the small cracks in the tile near the sink, trying to picture them in my house. I had a 3-bedroom place in Denver. 1 bedroom was mine. 1 was Ethan's. The 3rd was my home office, my sanctuary, really where I logged extra hours and kept our life balanced. I didn't even open my budgeting app before I said yes. I didn't ask for a written timeline. I didn't set rules. I heard the strain in my brother's voice and made the decision with my heart. Within a week, everything shifted. I moved my desk into the corner of my bedroom and boxed up the neat shelves that had once made me feel organized and in control. Ethan, without complaining, packed up his room so Ryan and Megan could take it. He tried to act like it was an adventure, like camping indoors. He even joked about how we'd bond more, sharing a space. But I noticed the way he folded his posters carefully, like he wasn't sure when they'd go back up again. Tyler claimed the living room almost immediately. His backpack landed near the couch and stayed there. Chargers snaked across the coffee table. It didn't take long for the house to feel smaller. At first, I told myself it was good. The house sounded alive again. Ryan cooked breakfast one morning and flipped pancakes like we were kids back in our mom's kitchen. Megan talked about the Etsy shop she was going to launch and the decluttering business she might start. Tyler joked about finally networking in a bigger city. There was this brief illusion that we were all regrouping together, like a team. I liked that feeling. I missed that feeling. Being the stable one in a family can be lonely. Letting them in felt like relief. But relief has a cost. The grocery bill doubled by the 2nd week. Then it nearly tripled. The pantry I usually kept tightly organized became a revolving door. Snacks disappeared faster than I could restock them. The power bill jumped because someone always left lights on or had the TV running in the background. The AC hummed constantly, even when the weather didn't demand it. There were little things too, streaming subscriptions added without asking, food delivery charges because we had a stressful day, gas money requests that never seemed to lead to actual interviews. I noticed the numbers. Of course I did. I work in risk assessment. My entire job revolves around identifying patterns before they become problems. Yet at home, I kept overriding my own instincts. Anytime I gently mentioned expenses, Ryan would put an arm around my shoulders and tell me I was overthinking. "This is temporary," he'd say. "Once I land something solid, I'll pay you back for everything." Megan would nod earnestly, saying she just needed momentum. Tyler mostly stayed quiet, scrolling on his phone, occasionally chiming in about concerts or clothing drops. He wanted to check out once things turned around. I wanted to believe in that future version of us, the one where they got back on their feet and I was the Fakin, supportive sister who helped bridge the gap. Meanwhile, Ethan's world shrank. He stopped inviting friends over. He did his homework at the corner of my dresser while I answered emails. Some nights I caught him staring at the wall where his posters used to hang. He never complained. That almost made it worse. He'd say, "It's fine, Mom," in a way that sounded too mature for 15. I told myself it was temporary for him too, that sacrifices build character, that helping family teaches compassion. But compassion without structure turns into something else. By the third month, routines that once felt like small inconveniences became habits. Dishes piled up if I didn't wash them. Trash overflowed if I didn't take it out. The grocery list grew longer while job leads grew thinner. Ryan said interviews were promising but never materialized. Megan talked about plans more than she executed them. Tyler stayed up late gaming and slept through mornings that could have been used for applications. And I kept swiping my card. I kept telling myself I was preventing a bigger crisis. Looking back, I can see the warning signs, the subtle shift from gratitude to expectation. The way "thank you" became "can you also?" The way shared space slowly felt less shared and more occupied. I remember one evening standing in the kitchen, staring at a stack of takeout containers, calculating silently how much those meals cost versus what a simple grocery dinner would have been. I opened my budgeting app that night and saw the neat little buckets I'd created: mortgage, utilities, Ethan's activities, emergency fund, starting to blur. I adjusted numbers to make them fit, moved a little from here to cover there, promised myself I'd replenish it later. What I didn't admit was how tired I was becoming. Not physically, though, there was that too, but emotionally. Being the stable one means you rarely get to fall apart. You become the landing pad, the safety net. And safety nets stretch thinner the more weight you put on them. I started picking up extra hours at work to offset the increase in expenses. I told Ethan it was just a busy season. He nodded and went back to his homework. The house stayed loud. The TV flickered late into the night. Laughter from the living room drifted into my bedroom while I answered emails in the dark. Sometimes I'd stand in the hallway and listen to them talking, and I'd feel like a guest in my own home. That thought would scare me, so I'd push it away. They were family. Family doesn't count every inconvenience. Family doesn't set strict boundaries when someone is struggling. At least, that's what I'd always believed. But the thing about blurred boundaries is that they don't stay blurred. They fade completely. By the time Tyler casually mentioned using my card for candy, the groundwork had already been laid. Access had become normal. Shared Wi-Fi meant shared devices. Saved payment information meant convenience. My willingness to cover just this once had evolved into silent permission. I didn't see it happening because I was too focused on keeping everything steady. Too focused on being the dependable one. If someone had asked me then whether I felt taken advantage of, I would have said no. I would have said we were just in a rough patch, that helping them was the right thing, that my brother would never let things spiral too far. I still believed there was a line no one would cross. I just didn't realize how close we were to it. And when that line finally broke, when the numbers lit up my phone in the middle of the night, it didn't feel like a sudden betrayal. It felt like the inevitable result of months of small allowances, small silences, small compromises. The truth is, by the time $8,400 disappeared, the real loss had started long before that. It started the day I said yes without asking what that yes would cost. I didn't sleep after I saw the charges. I lay in the dark beside Ethan, staring at the ceiling, replaying every transaction in my mind like they were scenes from a security camera. Concert tickets, Gaming equipment, designer drops, a festival deposit in another state, $8,400. The number pulsed behind my eyes. Around 1 in the morning, I got up. The house was quiet in that deceptive way homes get when everyone thinks nothing is wrong. I walked down the hallway and into the living room. The TV was off, but the faint blue light from Tyler's phone lit up his face. He had earbuds in. His thumbs moved lazily across the screen. He looked relaxed, unbothered, comfortable. He didn't even notice me standing there. For a split second, I imagined what it would look like to confront him right then, to pull the earbuds out and demand answers. But something in me resisted that impulse. I didn't want noise. I wanted clarity, and I knew Tyler wouldn't give me that without deflecting. So I kept walking. Straight down the hall, I stopped at Ryan's door and knocked. There was a pause, then the sound of shifting sheets. The door opened a crack. Ryan stood there in a t-shirt and boxers, rubbing his eyes like I'd interrupted something sacred. "What?" he muttered, already irritated. I held up my phone instead of speaking. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I scrolled through the transactions slowly, letting the screen glow between us. "These charges are on my card," I said. "They're not mine." He blinked at the screen as if it were written in a foreign language. His eyes moved over the totals, the merchant names, the dates. For a moment, I thought I saw recognition. Then it disappeared behind confusion. "You sure it's not fraud?" he said. "Banks mess up all the time." The word hit me strangely. Fraud. As if this were some faceless cybercrime. I took a steady breath. The confirmation emails went to an account logged in from my iPad. From this house, from my Wi-Fi. The delivery address is this house. And earlier tonight, Tyler said he used my card for candy. Ryan sighed, long and dramatic, like I was making his night harder than it needed to be. "He's just a kid, Jordan," he said. His voice softened, but not in a supportive way, in a dismissive way. "Kids will be kids." There it was again. That sentence. "He's 19, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "That's an adult. And that money was for Ethan's medical expenses and my car repair. This isn't candy. It's over $8,000. Ryan shifted his weight, already retreating from the conversation. "You're spiraling. Let's figure it out in the morning. Don't make it a whole thing right now." A whole thing. I stood there, waiting for something else. An apology. A promise to talk to his son. Even just acknowledgement that this was serious. Instead, he closed the door. Just like that. The hallway felt smaller, the air heavier. I stood there longer than I needed to, listening to the faint sound of Tyler laughing at something on his phone. The contrast was surreal. Inside his room, my brother could go back to sleep. In the living room, my nephew could scroll uninterrupted, and in my chest, something shifted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was clarity. They did not see me as someone being harmed. They saw me as a resource, a solution, a backup plan, a walking account balance. I went back to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. Ethan stirred slightly but didn't wake. I watched him for a moment, his face relaxed in sleep, unaware of the numbers burned into my brain. I thought about the inhaler refill due next month, the car making that grinding sound on the highway, the overtime shifts I'd picked up so everyone could land softly, and I understood something in that quiet room. If I didn't take this seriously, no one would. So I opened my laptop. I started with the bank. I flagged every charge I didn't authorize. I documented dates and amounts carefully, the way I do at work when I'm building a compliance case. No drama, just facts. I opened disputes where I could and noted which charges were still pending. Then I went account by account. Food delivery apps, shopping platforms, ticket sites, streaming services. Anywhere my card had been stored, I removed payment methods, logged out of shared devices, changed passwords, enabled extra authentication steps. Each click felt steady, controlled, measured. This wasn't revenge. It was containment. By 2:10 a.m., the damage wasn't undone, but it had stopped growing. Every invisible pipeline they'd been using to access my money was frozen. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. For the first time since midnight, my hands stopped shaking. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded. When I finally lay back down, I didn't expect sleep. I just needed to close my eyes and gather strength for morning. The explosion came at 7:30 a.m. "What the hell?" Ryan's voice echoed down the hallway. I heard footsteps, fast and heavy, cabinet doors opening, a chair scraping. I walked into the kitchen, already holding my coffee mug. Ryan stood there with his phone in his hand, jaw tight. "Did you mess with the accounts?" he demanded. "My card just got declined at the gas station." Before I could respond, Megan's voice carried from the hallway. "Instacart says payment method invalid. Did the bank freeze everything? Are we hacked?" Then Tyler appeared, hoodie on, irritation written all over his face. "My Amazon order disappeared. The tickets app says payment failed. What did you do?" They lined up across my kitchen like I was customer service. I took a slow sip of coffee. It steadied me. "Nothing's wrong with the Wi-Fi," I said. "And no, the bank didn't make a mistake." "I did." Ryan frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said evenly, "after watching over $8,400 disappear from my account without my permission, I froze every way any of you have been using my money." Silence. Megan's expression shifted first. 8,000 what? I turned my phone toward them, scrolling through the transactions again. VIP concert tickets, gaming equipment, clothing, festival deposit. The evidence laid out plainly. Tyler's posture changed. Defensive. "You can't prove that was me," he said quickly. "The confirmation emails were sent to an address logged in from my iPad," I replied. "The delivery address is this house. The timestamps line up with when you were here, and you told me you used my card." Ryan threw up his hands. "You could have talked to us before going nuclear, Jordan. We're already under pressure." I looked at him steadily. "I did talk to you. Last night. You told me kids will be kids." The air between us felt charged, not loud, not explosive, just tight. For the first time in months, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel responsible for smoothing things over. I felt awake, and I knew this conversation wasn't going to end with apologies. It was going to end with boundaries. That morning didn't explode the way they probably expected it to. There was no screaming match, no dramatic threats, no slam doors, at least not from me. What there was instead was something they weren't used to seeing: consistency. I didn't reverse anything. I didn't apologize. I didn't soften the edges of what I had done overnight. Ryan kept pacing the kitchen like the inconvenience was happening to him. Megan stood with her arms crossed, her face caught somewhere between disbelief and offense. Tyler hovered near the hallway, jaw tight, scrolling through his phone like if he refreshed enough times, the money would magically reappear. "You didn't have to lock everything," Ryan said finally, lowering his voice like reason might coax me back into submission. "We could have handled this as a family." I set my mug down carefully. "We are handling it as a family," I said. "I handled it." That seemed to irritate him more than if I'd yelled. Megan jumped in next. "We went to order groceries and it was humiliating, Jordan. The app just declined. Do you know what that feels like?" I looked at her. "Do you know what it feels like to open your bank account and realize your emergency fund is gone?" Silence stretched between us. Tyler scoffed. "You're acting like I robbed a bank. It was just some purchases. You're being dramatic." There it was again, that word, dramatic. As if protecting what I earned was theatrical. "It was $8,400, I said quietly. "That's not dramatic. That's math." Ryan ran a hand through his hair. "Okay, so what now? You're just going to keep everything locked down forever?" "For now?" I said. "Yes." And that was the moment they realized this wasn't a mood. It wasn't something that would pass after coffee. It was a line. That night, after Ethan finished his homework and disappeared into the small corner of my bedroom we now called his space, I asked everyone to meet me at the kitchen table. No TV, no phones, just us. Ryan sat at the end like he was presiding over a meeting he hadn't called. Megan folded her arms tightly across her chest. Tyler slouched so low in his chair it looked like he was trying to disappear without actually leaving. I took a breath. "We're going to talk about what happened. All of it," Ryan started first. "We know you're upset. Anyone would be. But freezing everything without warning? That was over the line." "Over the line?" I repeated. "Yes," Megan said. "We were blindsided. You embarrassed us." I stared at them, genuinely stunned. "Embarrassed you?" Tyler rolled his eyes. "Yeah, I had things pending. You messed them up. I let them talk. I let them unload their version of inconvenience, declined cards, canceled orders, disrupted plans. I waited until they ran out of steam. Then I reached into a folder I'd placed beside me and slid a printed statement into the middle of the table. "This," I said, tapping the paper, "is my last month of expenses. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, gas, Ethan's soccer fees. The emergency fund for medical costs insurance doesn't fully cover. The car repair estimate I'd been postponing. And then, highlighted in a different color, the additional expenses since they moved in food deliveries, increased utilities, streaming subscriptions, transportation, miscellaneous charges. I've been covering almost everything," I said calmly. "And I've been doing it quietly." They looked down at the paper like it might accuse them out loud. "When you called me from that parking lot," I said to Ryan, "I didn't hesitate. I moved my son out of his room. I rearranged my house. I rearranged my budget. I picked up extra shifts. That was me being family." My voice didn't shake. It surprised me how steady it was. "And in return," I continued, glancing at Tyler, "you used my card to buy luxury items. Tickets, clothes, gaming equipment, a festival." Tyler's face flushed. "I was stressed, okay? You don't get it. It's not easy being 19 and broke and watching everyone online live their best life. I just wanted to feel normal." Megan nodded quickly. "He's been through a lot. We all have. You're stable, Jordan. You have a good job. It's not like you're struggling the way we are." I let that sit for a second. "You think I'm not struggling?" I asked quietly. "Money to you is convenience. To me, it's Ethan's inhaler. It's co-pays. It's making sure my car doesn't die on the highway. It's the difference between us having a home and us calling someone from a parking lot asking for help." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying things change now." The room went still. "From this point on," I said, "no one uses my cards, my accounts, my apps, or my logins. If you want a subscription, you pay for it. If you want takeout, you cover it. My money is not community property." Tyler scoffed again, but I continued. "Second, everyone over 18 needs to be actively working or actively applying. Real applications, interviews, not scrolling listings and complaining." Ryan's jaw tightened. "You think it's that easy?" "I think it's necessary," I replied. "And third," I said, leaning forward slightly, "you have 10 days to show me action. Not promises, not plans. Action. Some form of income coming in. A plan to repay what was taken. Evidence that you understand this was not a joke." Megan's eyes widened. "Or what?" "Or you start planning to move out." The silence that followed was heavy and real. "You wouldn't," Ryan said finally. "We're your family." "I already moved my child out of his room for my family," I said. "I already drained my time and my savings for my family. Being family doesn't mean I stop being a mother." That was the first time they didn't immediately argue back. They stared at me like they were meeting someone new. But the truth was, I wasn't new. I was just no longer shrinking. I stood up, leaving the printed statement on the table between us. "You have 10 days, I repeated. "Use them wisely." As I walked down the hallway toward my bedroom, I felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't anger. It was relief. For months, I'd been carrying the weight of everyone else's instability on my back, convincing myself that if I just tried harder, stayed calmer, gave more, everything would smooth out. But boundaries don't destroy families. They reveal them. And that night, sitting at that kitchen table, I realized something that felt both terrifying and freeing. I wasn't the safety net anymore. I was the ground. And if they didn't learn to stand on it, They were going to have to find somewhere else to land. The next morning, I didn't wait for motivation to magically appear in the house. I've learned something in my job hope is not a strategy. If I was going to give them 10 days, I was going to make sure there were no excuses about not knowing where to start. Before work, while the house was still quiet, I sat at my laptop and pulled up every job listing within a reasonable radius. Retail stores hiring seasonal staff, grocery chains looking for stalkers, coffee shops advertising open interviews, warehouse shifts, delivery driver gigs, night stocking positions, the kind of jobs no one brags about online, but the kind that pay actual bills. I printed out a stack thick enough to make a point. I highlighted positions that matched Ryan's past logistics experience. I circled entry-level openings that required no prior experience for Tyler. I even made small notes in the margins: bus route available, flexible shifts, walk-in interviews. I placed the stack neatly in the center of the kitchen table and set a pen on top. On a sticky note, I wrote, "These places are hiring now. I can help with applications tonight." When I left for work, I felt strangely calm. Not optimistic, not pessimistic, just steady. I had drawn the line. Now it was their move. When I came home that evening, the first thing I noticed was the stack still sitting there. The pen had rolled off and was lying on the floor. One of the printouts had a faint ring from someone's drink on it. The TV was on. Tyler was sprawled across the couch. Ryan sat in the armchair scrolling on his phone. Megan was in the kitchen reheating leftovers. I stood there for a moment, letting the scene settle in. At dinner, I pointed to the pile. "Did anyone look at these?" Ryan shrugged without meeting my eyes. I skimmed them. "Most of those pay nothing. We can't live off that." Megan sigged. "And some are far. Gas isn't free, Jordan." Tyler picked up one of the pages between two fingers like it was something unpleasant. "Target? Grocery store? Fast food?" He snorted. "That's not my vibe." I felt something in me tighten, but I kept my voice level. "Your vibe right now is living off someone else's emergency fund." He rolled his eyes. "You're being dramatic again. One job isn't going to fix everything, so why start with something beneath me?" Beneath him. The words echoed louder than he probably intended. "Work isn't beneath you," I said quietly. "Stealing is." He pushed back his chair with a screech. "I'm not stealing anymore. You already froze everything. What more do you want?" "Responsibility," I replied. Ryan finally looked up. "He's trying," he said defensively. "Trying looks like applications submitted," I answered. "Interviews scheduled. Shifts worked. Not scrolling." Tyler muttered something under his breath and stormed back to the living room. The TV volume went up a few notches. Ryan rubbed his face like the entire conversation was exhausting him. "You think this is easy? You think it feels good being in this position?" "No," I said honestly. "I don't think it does. But being uncomfortable isn't the same as being unable." The next couple of days followed a similar pattern. Promises floated around the house. "I'll apply tonight." "I'm waiting to hear back." "I'm researching better options." But the hours slipped by, the same way they always had: screens glowing, takeout bags appearing, the fridge emptying faster than it should. On the third day, I took a personal day from work. I didn't announce it. I got Ethan off to school like normal, kissed him goodbye, and then walked back into the house with a laundry basket. If they weren't going to take my ultimatum seriously, I was going to make it tangible. I started in the living room. The unopened gaming headset box was still tucked under the couch. The limited edition sneakers were still in their pristine bag near Tyler's duffel. A hoodie with tags attached hung over the back of a chair. I collected each item carefully, matching it in my mind to the confirmation emails I had saved. Order numbers, purchase dates, store policies. Anything still within a return window went into the basket. It wasn't about spite. It was about restoration. I loaded everything into my car and drove to the first store. At the electronics counter, I placed the headset on the counter and slid my ID and order confirmation forward. The associate scanned it and nodded. "You're within the return window," she said. "Refund will go back to the original card." I watched the small digital screen light up with the amount being credited back. It wasn't the full $8,400, but it was something. It felt like oxygen. At the sneaker store, the clerk raised his eyebrows. "You sure you don't want to keep these? They're sold out everywhere." "I didn't buy them," I replied, "and they were paid for without my permission." He didn't ask more questions. He processed the return. By the time I finished at the last store, I had recovered over $5,000. Not everything, but enough to shift the situation from catastrophic to manageable. When I pulled into my driveway, Tyler was pacing on the porch. He must have received the refund notifications. "What did you do?" he demanded as I stepped out of the car. "I returned what I could," I said calmly. "Anything still eligible." "You can't just do that," he snapped. "That was my stuff." "It was purchased with my money," I replied. "It was never yours." He stepped closer, anger rising. "I'm calling the cops. You stole thousands of dollars from me." For a moment, I almost laughed at the irony. But I didn't. I met his eyes evenly. "You can call if you'd like. I'll show them my bank statements and the receipts tied to my card." He froze. Ryan appeared in the doorway, tension written across his face. "Jordan, maybe you could have talked to us before doing all that." "I did talk to you," I said quietly. "I gave you 10 days. "It's only been 3, he argued. "And in 3 days," I replied. Nothing changed. The truth settled over the porch like heavy air. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't threatening. I was simply refusing to continue funding the illusion that nothing had happened. The returns were just the beginning. The real test wasn't whether they could complain convincingly. It was whether they could act differently. That night, as I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the muted TV sounds drifting from the living room, I realized something important. Consequences don't have to be loud to be effective. Sometimes they're quiet, sometimes they're administrative. Sometimes they look like receipts and refund confirmations and printed job listings no one wants to read. And sometimes they're the first step toward deciding whether the people living under your roof are willing to grow up or whether you're going to have to make the space smaller again. I didn't feel cruel. I didn't feel powerful. I felt resolved. And for the first time since this started, that felt like enough. The week after the returns felt like watching a fragile experiment unfold in slow motion. For a moment, just a brief, flickering moment, I thought maybe the ultimatum had landed. Maybe the refunds, the frozen accounts, the printed job listings, stacked like quiet accusations on the table, had finally pierced the fog they'd been living in. On day 4, Ryan told me he was going to meet my friend who managed a coffee shop downtown. I had reached out to her privately, asking if she'd at least give him an interview. I didn't frame it as a favor. I framed it as an opportunity. She agreed. When he came home that afternoon, he was holding a folded paper schedule in his hand, like it weighed more than it should. "They've got me on morning shifts," he muttered. 6 a.m. I haven't woken up that early in months." "That's good," I said evenly. "Consistency helps." He shot me a look, half defensive, half resentful. "It's temporary." I didn't respond. Temporary had become a word that meant nothing in this house. To his credit, he showed up. The first few days, he left before sunrise, grumbling about the manager being younger than him, about customers being impatient, about standing on his feet. But he went. And when he came home, he was tired in a way that looked different from scrolling fatigue. It was physical. Earned. Megan signed up for a couple of grocery delivery apps. She took a handful of orders and came back complaining about parking, about low tips, about how unfair the algorithm was. But she did leave the house. That was new. Even Tyler surprised me once. After Ryan barked at him one evening, he filled out an online application for a warehouse job. He hovered over his laptop longer than usual. He didn't tell me about it directly, but I saw the confirmation email pop up on the family tablet before I removed my account from it entirely. For a few nights, the TV stayed off because people were actually tired. The fridge didn't empty quite as quickly. The air in the house shifted just slightly. I caught myself almost believing this could work. Then the cracks started showing again. Ryan came home one afternoon and dropped his apron onto the kitchen counter with a sharp flick of his wrist. "I'm not doing this," he announced. I looked up from my laptop. "Doing what?" This, he said, gesturing vaguely. Being treated like some kid. The pay is garbage. The customers are rude. The manager talks down to me. It's not worth it. How many shifts did you work? I asked calmly. 4. 4. And that's enough to decide? I said. It's not sustainable, he replied, already convincing himself. I need something that matches my experience. I held his gaze. Right now, you need something that matches your situation. He didn't like that. I could see it in the tightening of his jaw. Megan followed shortly after. The tips aren't consistent, she said one evening, scrolling through her phone. It's barely covering gas. It doesn't make sense. Tyler, predictably, had his own version. The warehouse sent an orientation email. He read it and declared the place had bad vibes. He never showed up. By day 8, we were sliding backward. The living room looked familiar again. 3 adults sprawled across furniture, screens glowing, commentary about how unfair everything was. I stood in the hallway one evening watching them, and it felt like déjà vu. Only this time, I wasn't confused. I had given them structure, opportunity, time. The 10-day clock was ticking. That night, after Ethan finished his homework and went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table alone. I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. I opened my laptop and drafted a short letter. Nothing dramatic, just factual. It outlined what had happened, the unauthorized charges, the lack of sustained effort toward employment, the agreement we'd discussed at the table. At the bottom, I wrote that they had 72 hours to make concrete plans to move out. When I printed it, the sound of the machine felt louder than usual. I placed the letter in the center of the table. Ryan found it first. I heard the paper shift before I heard his voice. "You're serious?" he asked, stepping into the doorway of my bedroom. "Yes," I said. "You're actually kicking us out." "I'm asking you to take responsibility for your own lives," I replied. "That's not the same thing. It is when you're living in someone else's house without contributing." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched across his face. "You'd really choose money over family?" I looked past him at Ethan's sleeping form in the dim light. "I'm choosing stability for my son." Megan tried a softer approach. "We just need more time," she whispered later that night. "Everything feels so unstable." "I know it does," I said quietly. "It's felt unstable for me too." Tyler didn't try softness. He called me heartless, said I was overreacting, said it was just money, just stuff. But it was never just money. It was trust. It was respect. It was the difference between helping and being used. The next 72 hours were tense and loud in ways I hadn't experienced before. There were slammed doors, phone calls made in hushed, urgent tones, boxes pulled from closets, trash bags filled hastily. I stayed calm, not detached calm. Ethan watched quietly from the couch as the house shifted again. I caught his eye once and saw something there I hadn't seen in months. Relief. On the last day, Ryan stood in the doorway with a set of spare keys in his hand. His expression wasn't angry anymore. It was wounded. "I never thought you'd do this," he said. "I never thought I'd have to," I replied. They loaded their things into a borrowed pickup truck. Some items were left behind too bulky, too inconvenient. The house felt oddly hollow as the truck pulled away. When the door closed behind them, the silence was almost startling. No background television, no scrolling commentary, just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of Ethan's footsteps in the hallway. He walked into the living room and looked around like he was seeing it for the first time again. "Can I have my room back?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said. That night, as I helped him carry his posters back down the hallway, I felt the weight in my chest finally loosen. The week had been heavy, confrontational, uncomfortable. But it had also been necessary. Boundaries aren't loud declarations. They're decisions you stand behind even when they're inconvenient. And as I stood in my son's doorway watching him tape his posters back onto the wall, I realized something steady and undeniable. I hadn't lost my family. I had simply stopped financing their refusal to grow up. After they left, the house felt unfamiliar in the quiet. For the first time in months, there wasn't a television murmuring in the background or someone pacing through the kitchen looking for snacks I hadn't budgeted for. The silence wasn't empty. It was steady. It felt earned. The first week on our own again was mostly practical. I went back through every account, every dispute, every confirmation email. The bank finalized several of the claims I had filed that night when I couldn't sleep. Some of the transactions were reversed, some weren't. Between the returns I had already processed and the disputes that went through, I recovered about $7,600. Not the full amount, but enough to breathe again. I scheduled the car repair I had postponed for months. I refilled Ethan's prescriptions without checking my balance twice in the pharmacy line. I paid the overdue utilities and watched the numbers in my budgeting app slowly rebalance. It wasn't dramatic. It was administrative, but it felt like rebuilding something brick by brick. One Saturday morning, Ethan and I drove to a movie theater across town. It was nothing special, just a superhero sequel he'd been wanting to see. But when I bought popcorn without instinctively calculating whether we should split a small instead of a large, something shifted inside me. On the drive home, he looked out the window and said quietly, "It's nice when it's just us again." That sentence hit deeper than any argument I'd had at the kitchen table. "It is," I agreed. Through mutual acquaintances and the small-town way news travels even in a city, I heard bits and pieces about Ryan and his family. They were bouncing between friends' couches at first, then a short-term motel. Ryan's car was eventually repossessed when he couldn't keep up with payments. Tyler picked up part-time work at a fast food place across town. Megan was still looking for something steadier. There was no dramatic downfall, no explosive confrontation. Just real life catching up with them in the way it eventually does when no one else is buffering the consequences. One night, my phone lit up with Ryan's name. I let it ring. A voicemail followed. I listened to it later, sitting on the edge of my bed. His voice sounded tired. He apologized, but it was tangled in explanations, stress, pressure, pride, embarrassment. He said he hoped I didn't hate them. I didn't call back. Not because I hated him. I didn't. But because I wasn't ready to reopen a door that had taken so much strength to close. In the quiet weeks that followed, I thought a lot about that phrase, "Kids will be kids." It had been said casually, like it was harmless, like it erased impact. But kids grow up, and at some point, someone has to stop absorbing the damage for them. I started noticing things about myself too. The way I moved through my house differently. The way I no longer hesitated before logging into my bank account. The way my shoulders didn't tighten when I heard footsteps in the hallway at night. Stability isn't flashy. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits there, steady and reliable. Ethan slowly reclaimed his room. We repainted one wall together. He rearranged his desk. He invited a friend over for the first time in months. Watching him spread back out into his own space felt like watching a plant lean toward sunlight after being crowded. One evening, as we were cleaning up dinner, he looked at me and asked, "Are you sad they left?" I paused. It was an honest question. "I'm sad it had to happen that way," I said, "but I'm not sad about protecting us." He nodded like that made sense. And in that moment, I realized he had been watching more closely than I thought. Not just the arguments, the decisions. People sometimes think boundaries are about punishment. They're not. They're about clarity, about defining where your responsibility ends and someone else's begins. For months, I had blurred that line in the name of loyalty. I had equated sacrifice with love. I had believed that enduring discomfort quietly was noble. But love without limits isn't generosity. It's self-erasure. I didn't regret helping them initially. I don't think compassion is a mistake. But I did regret ignoring the warning signs. I regretted silencing my instincts because confrontation felt uncomfortable. I regretted teaching my son, even briefly, that it was normal to let people overstep just because they shared your last name. One Sunday afternoon, as I was folding laundry, I found one of the printed job listings that had been left behind under the couch. It was wrinkled, stained faintly with a coffee ring. I held it for a moment before throwing it away. It felt symbolic somehow, a reminder of an opportunity offered and declined. Weeks passed. The house settled into a new rhythm. I worked my regular hours instead of scrambling for overtime. We cooked more meals at home. Not because we had to compensate for 3 extra adults, but because we wanted to. There was laughter again, lighter this time, unforced. Sometimes I wondered if Ryan would ever fully understand what happened. If Tyler would ever connect the dots between his choices and the consequences that followed. But I also realized that understanding wasn't something I could manufacture for them. What I could control was what I allowed in my space moving forward. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, I sat on the couch alone and reflected on how different everything felt from that night when I stared at $8,400 worth of unauthorized charges on my phone. Back then, I felt small, outnumbered, dismissed. Now, I felt anchored. The hardest part hadn't been freezing the accounts or returning the merchandise. It hadn't even been asking them to leave. The hardest part had been believing that I was allowed to draw that line at all. Family loyalty can be powerful. It can also be blinding. But loyalty should not require self-destruction. It should not demand that you sacrifice your child's stability to preserve someone else's comfort. I don't know what the future holds for Ryan and his family. I hope they find steadiness. I hope Tyler learns that responsibility isn't beneath him. I hope Megan finds something that feels sustainable. I genuinely do. But I also know this. My first responsibility is to the life I built and the son who depends on it. The night I froze those accounts, I thought I was just stopping financial damage. I didn't realize I was reclaiming something much bigger, my sense of agency, my boundaries, my voice. And when people ask me now whether I regret taking control, I tell them the truth. No. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the people who depend on you is to stop cushioning the fall for those who refuse to stand. In the weeks after they moved out, the fallout didn't come as a dramatic explosion. It came quietly, in pieces, like loose threads I hadn't noticed were still attached to me. The bank finished processing the rest of my disputes. A few more charges were reversed, some weren't. Between the store refunds and the approved claims, I recovered most of the $8,400. Not all of it, but enough to stabilize what had been shaken. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one evening, refreshing my banking app, watching the numbers settle into something recognizable again. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't abundance. It was balance. And balance, I realized, is underrated. I scheduled the car repair I had postponed for months. The mechanic called me to confirm the appointment, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't hesitate before saying yes. I refilled Ethan's prescriptions without that tight feeling in my chest, the one that always whispered, "What if something else hits this month?" I paid down the credit card that had absorbed the overflow during those crowded months. One by one, the small financial fractures sealed themselves. But the real shift wasn't in my account. It was in the air. The house felt lighter. Not because it was emptier, but because it was ours again. No tension humming in the background. No background TV, noise masking, unresolved conversations. Just quiet. Intentional quiet. One Saturday morning, Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table, eating pancakes. No one else hovering, no one else reaching across him for something. He looked around the room and said, almost absent-mindedly, "It doesn't feel crowded anymore." He didn't say it with bitterness. Just observation. "I know," I replied. Later that afternoon, we moved his desk fully back into his room. We repainted the wall he'd once covered in posters. He put everything back exactly the way it used to be, but somehow it felt different, stronger, like he understood what it meant to have something protected. Through friends of friends and the kind of loose connections that never fully disappear, I heard about Ryan. They had stayed with a coworker for a while. Then a short-term rental. His car was eventually repossessed. Tyler picked up part-time work at a fast food place. Megan was trying to piece together gig shifts again. There was no dramatic rock bottom, just reality stepping in where I had stepped back. One night, my phone lit up with Ryan's name again. I let it ring. Then came the voicemail. His voice sounded tired, less defensive than before. He said he'd been thinking. He said he didn't handle things well. He said he wished it hadn't gotten so bad. There were still excuses woven into it, stress, pride, pressure, but there was also something new. Acknowledgement, maybe. "I hope you don't hate us," he ended with. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time after listening to it. I didn't hate them. That surprised me at first. After everything, I expected anger to linger. But what I felt wasn't hatred. It was distance. Clear, necessary distance. Hate requires emotional investment. And I had already invested enough. I didn't call back right away. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed to protect the peace I had just rebuilt. Boundaries aren't walls you throw up once and forget. They're structures you maintain. Over the next month, life continued in a rhythm that felt almost unfamiliar in its steadiness. I worked my normal hours instead of scrambling for overtime. I cooked dinner without calculating how to stretch portions for 5 adults. I left my wallet on the counter without that tiny flicker of anxiety. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit on the couch and replay everything in my mind: the candy comment, the midnight banking app glow, the kitchen table confrontation, the porch standoff over returned merchandise. It all felt like something that had happened to another version of me, the version of me who believed that saying yes automatically made me a good sister, the version of me who thought discomfort was the price of loyalty. I don't regret helping them at first. I don't think compassion is foolish. But I do regret how long I ignored my own warning signs. I regret the nights Ethan fell asleep in the corner of my room while I convinced myself we were just going through a rough patch. One evening, Ethan asked me something that caught me off guard. "If they asked to come back," he said carefully, "would you let them?" I looked at him for a moment before answering. "Not like before," I said. He nodded, as if that was enough. That was the real change. Not that I had hardened, not that I had become unforgiving, but that I had learned. Family isn't a blank check. Love isn't unlimited access. Support isn't silent self-sacrifice. I started noticing the small ways I had changed too. When a coworker tried to push extra work onto my plate because you're so organized, I said no. When a distant cousin hinted about needing a temporary place to stay, I asked direct questions about timelines and expectations before answering. I didn't apologize for wanting clarity, and that clarity felt powerful, not loud, not aggressive, just firm. There's something no one tells you about reclaiming control. It's not glamorous. It doesn't come with applause. It comes with quiet evenings where you sit alone and realize you're no longer bracing for impact. One Sunday afternoon, I found myself standing in the living room, sunlight cutting across the floor, and I thought about that sentence again. Kids will be kids. Maybe that's true for a while. But adults have to be adults. And sometimes the only way they learn that is when the safety net folds up. I didn't fold it up out of cruelty. I folded it up because it was tearing. If I had kept stretching myself thinner to protect them from consequences, I would have eventually had nothing left to protect Ethan with. And that was a cost I wasn't willing to pay. The night $8,400 disappeared, I thought the worst thing had already happened. It hadn't. The worst thing would have been ignoring it. The worst thing would have been teaching my son that it's normal to let people overstep you because they share your blood. Instead, I showed him something different. I showed him that protecting your stability doesn't make you selfish, that drawing a line doesn't mean you stopped loving someone, that accountability isn't cruelty. Sometimes it's clarity, and in the quiet that followed, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. I didn't choose money over family. I chose responsibility over excuses. I chose stability over chaos. I chose my son. And if I ever have to choose again, I already know which side I'll stand on. If there's one thing this story taught me, it's that boundaries don't break families, they reveal them. What started as $8,400 in unauthorized charges was never just about money. It was about respect, responsibility, and the quiet moment when you realize that love without limits can slowly turn into self-destruction. I didn't win anything by locking accounts or asking them to leave. I didn't celebrate. What I gained wasn't revenge, it was stability. It was peace. It was the ability to look at my son and know I chose his future over someone else's excuses. Sometimes the hardest decisions aren't loud. They're made in silence, at a kitchen table, with shaking hands and a steady voice. And sometimes, the most powerful act of love is saying, "This is where it stops." If this story resonated with you, if you've ever struggled with drawing the line between helping and being taken advantage of, you're not alone. Thank you for listening and sharing this space with me. Subscribe to Revenge Tale Society for more real-life stories about boundaries, resilience, and finding the courage to take control when it matters most.